Let's get this out of the way first. WandaVision is not a great show. I know, that's not the sexy answer you were hoping to hear, but while it was a show I initially showered with praise up until its dismal series finale. I mean, I literally made a video talking about why I thought the show was perfect, and then the series finale dropped, and it just felt like a schmuck, let me tell you. But looking back on it, the cracks were there earlier than we thought, ultimately leading to its undoing. Let me explain. In 2021, WandaVision took the world by storm. It was the most unifying and exciting project to come out of the MCU post-Endgame, marking the studio's first foray into television, seemingly signaling a focus on smaller, more character-driven pieces that would benefit from the length afforded to them by the format by riffing on the history of arguably the most quintessential subgenre of television, the sitcom. For its first 3 episodes, WandaVision presented a mystery that found our 2 protagonists, Wanda Maximoff and Vision, who at this point was dead, stuck inside a simulation, a sitcom, the veneer of suburbia, as they and the audience experience strange occurrences, incursions, and glitches in the episode, creating intrigue around what is actually happening in Westview. Right from the jump, we know things are off kilter, and that's part of the fun. The show doesn't need to intellectualize it. The first 3 episodes especially trust that the viewer will understand that the story of each episode adds to the character arc of Wanda, subsequently adding to the overarching mystery of the show, borrowing from the surrealism of such series as Twin Peaks to underpin the narrative. Much like WandaVision, Twin Peaks is also a show about television, playing with the genre conventions from detective shows, crime procedurals, soap operas, sitcoms, and more. However, Twin Peaks subverts the genres it's riffing on by juxtaposing them with bizarre, dreamlike elements. Lynch creates an unsettling atmosphere where the ordinary becomes eerie as he peels back the layers of suburbia, challenging genre conventions. Whereas with WandaVision, it's simply interested in aping classic sitcoms with the occasional surface-level subversion. The show uses sitcom tropes to convey Wanda's mental state, but it eventually returns to the tried-and-true superhero formula. By episode 4, WandaVision had started to ditch the gimmick, exposing that gimmick as precisely that. The show merely had a concept of a plan.
I have concepts of a plan.
A basic premise that was placing Wanda and Vision in sitcom pastiches without really establishing what exactly it was as a television show. While the genre influences bubbled beneath the surface in Twin Peaks, crafting a cohesive, overarching narrative of its own that probes the characters' subconscious fears, desires, traumas, and so forth, in WandaVision, there's no foundation, no identity to ground the show as it pivots from sitcom to sitcom. While it does pose some compelling ideas about grief and denial, particularly Wanda's need to escape reality to avoid her pain, the examination is but knee-deep, and largely used to advance the plot rather than to create a complex character study. The MCU's need for interconnectivity, clear resolutions, limits how far WandaVision can delve into these issues before shifting focus back to external conflicts. And that's frustrating. What started as an intriguing character-focused narrative that played with the form and conventions of the sitcom to explore the psychosis of Wanda became one more concerned with literally answering questions and over-explaining what was going on instead of using the ambiguity to explore Wanda's grief and trauma. The show loses all style and substance the second it leaves the hex, not leaving much open to interpretation. Visually, and writing-wise too, but there's no longer a discernible identity to the show. It's simply MCU gray and shot to look like an insert your MCU film of choice here. Once the nature of Wanda's reality is revealed and the rug is pulled out from under us, there's nothing left to chew on, nothing left to contemplate from a character perspective. It just becomes another ABC procedural, and that's the problem. Given the length of the format, good television is often character-focused due to the sheer amount of time afforded to the showrunners, writers, and actors to explore these characters as people. I don't know about you, but it's also what keeps me, the audience, tuning in week to week. We're enamored with their struggle, and because we spend so much time with them, are compelled to see how they succumb to or overcome the obstacles thrown at them. Take Mad Men or Breaking Bad, for example. While each episode has a story they tried to tell over the course of a 50-something minute runtime, the individual story is not the most important part of the series as a whole. Don Draper and Walter White are. Each of these individual episodes contributes to the overarching character study of the key protagonists, especially with Breaking Bad, where your protagonist was also the primary antagonist. The greatest obstacle for Walter White was himself. And so rarely did the show create an external villain for White to go up against season after season, because Vince Gilligan knew that would probably get pretty boring and formulaic. He would be explicitly spelling out everything the character is going through in the most exposition-laden exchanges, instead of allowing the audience to sit with the character and feel his transition into the antagonist. And while Walter would get entangled with an antagonistic force like Gus, it always came back to Walter. Gus would force him to make decisions that would send him further down the villain's path. The same was desired of WandaVision, where Wanda was clearly set up as the primary antagonist of the series, enslaving an entire community as a means to cope with the loss of Vision and the lack of a family. But the show opted to fall back on the larger MCU formula, over-explaining, adding entirely too many moving pieces, and the involvement of Sword, Monica Rambeau, basically everything outside of the Hex, overcrowding and overcomplicating what was otherwise a pretty straightforward conflict, which leads to tiring exposition dumps, unnecessary throwaway villains that culminate in a wildly unnecessary, rushed, and disappointing MCU finale, where our protagonists are engaging in fisticuffs with the anti-versions of themselves in Agatha Harkness and White Vision, which was never, ever what this show was. Then, worst of all, they just let Wanda off the hook because she won the battle and was the main character, so therefore has to be positioned positively to continue on in the MCU going forward. Whereas, if the show had maintained its character study, the climax would have been far more interesting. We'd be able to sympathize with Wanda's loss, understand her grief, without condoning her actions. Instead, WandaVision gives the character a platform to justify her actions and then has a third party legitimize her position in Monica Rambeau. The problem is, they didn't need to say anything. They shouldn't have said anything. Breaking Bad never has a scene that lets Walter White off the hook because the showrunners know that he's the bad guy and his actions are wrong. That should be self-evident. All of this amounted to a series that had fantastic individual episodes, but as part of a season of linear narrative television, don't quite add up. A scramble of concepts and premises, and while we didn't realize it at the time, WandaVision would then go on to define the recurring problem with Marvel TV, even as soon as the next project in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. It's a story not made for television. It's therefore fitting that the spin-off to the show that kickstarted the Disney Plus era of Marvel, Agatha All Along, should bring it back to Westview to course correct, offering WandaVision and Agatha showrunner Jack Schaefer an attempt to right the ship. While Agatha isn't some masterful piece of television, it's definitely a mixed bag so far. Across the first 4 episodes, it's clear that Schaefer took to heart what did and didn't work about WandaVision to craft a season of television that actually feels and operates like television. For all of its failings, we aren't so concerned about the form of the project that it overtakes the rest of the issues plaguing it. Finally, Marvel has a live-action TV show that feels like television, and we can judge it on the merits of television. But just because Marvel's kind of found their way with television doesn't mean that you have to settle for TV dinners. I mean, witchcraft might be off the table, but there's another solution just as incredible: Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals. Factor is a meal subscription service that makes meeting your nutrition goals easier than ever by delivering fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals right to your doorstep. Every fresh, never frozen meal is chef-crafted, dietitian-approved, and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Yeah, it's just you pop it in the microwave and boom, you're good to go. Factor takes stress out of meal planning and sets you up for success. Skip the grocery stores, prep work, and cooking fatigue. Choose from a weekly menu of 35 options, including popular options like Calorie Smart, vegan, and veggie options. Plus, there are loads of snack options. Factor also offers Gourmet Plus meals as part of your weekly options, which means you can get a little gourmet with your meal plan whenever you're craving something extra special. Factor has helped me stick to my routines, and they've done all that while helping me work towards my wellness goals. It's like Agatha herself has given me a magical spell to change my food life. So get in on the magic. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code FilmSpeak50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. That's code FilmSpeak50 at factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month of orders. Seriously, guys, I love Factor so much, and I know you're going to love them too, so give them a try, and thank you so much to Factor for sponsoring this video. With Agatha All Along, Jack Schaefer wanted to make clear her reference points. This wasn't simply a TV show inspired by TV, it was a TV show operating within a specific genre of television that uses specific shows within that genre as reference points, shorthand to tell what's otherwise a more traditional narrative season of television. And the times Agatha doesn't work is when it succumbs to the WandaVision curse. The best episodes of WandaVision are the ones that are directly aping something like The Dick Van Dyke Show, I Love Lucy, The Brady Bunch, Full House, or Modern Family. Straightforward recreations of classic sitcoms with Wanda and Vision. In the first episode of Agatha, Schaefer starts by rooting us in the world of WandaVision by doing a pastiche of Mayor of Easttown, which was a fun little bit until you realize it's nothing but that, and she isn't using it to explore the character, at least not initially, but rather using it to drive the plot. It's also not entirely clear about whether or not the detective aspect is supposed to be a joke from the jump because of how seriously it's played, which creates a bit of a tonal whiplash when it's revealed she's existing in a parody of one, Agnes of Westview. It's presenting as an episode of Mayor of Easttown or True Detective, but lacking the substance you'd expect from a detective show because that's not really what the show is about, and thus that element is dropped almost as soon as it begins, which makes the whole thing feel pretty lame and underwhelming in my opinion. The gimmick goes nowhere, creating a mystery, lingering on it, and then more or less solving it. The moment of Agatha peeling back the layers and realizing who she is a cool visual, but isn't really this monumental moment of character because we know it's coming and really aren't surprised by it. It means nothing, it's just something that happens to get us to a starting point for the real show to begin. The entirety of episode 1 feels like it wants to do the WandaVision thing of the outside world peeking through and Agatha is trying to figure out the nature of her reality, but it's so vague in its aims at worst and a retread of WandaVision at best. Everything that happens is not only incredibly obvious to the viewer, but drawn out and ditched, only making things more confusing as to where this whole thing is going, and I don't mean that in a good way. It plays like they had a lot of filler with very little substance, which is why this is easily the worst episode of the season thus far, and becomes even more frustrating when you get to episode 2 and you realize the 2 episodes could have just been combined in order to arrive at the point in a more succinct and satisfying way. That's not to say I didn't enjoy what they were doing with the Mayor of Easttown riff, and thought it could have been a cool way to unpack the story through the framework of a show like that, but in the end, it's largely superfluous. Ultimately, it's a good thing they got that out of the way first because it lets the show get back on track. Schaefer has Agatha break free, shedding the dead skin of WandaVision off of her to finally become what she needs to become. Agatha actually has more in common with shows like Buffy, Angel, Supernatural, a bit of What We Do in the Shadows when you get into the group dynamic, with the mystery element of Lost, the latter of which seems to be a Jack Schaefer special. Those are, again, the reference points that root Agatha in a specific genre of television, but as opposed to WandaVision, they aren't the premise. That's where WandaVision dropped the ball. It stopped being Twin Peaks meets Lost and gave us exposition dump scenes with soared that had no discernible identity outside of being just another Marvel movie. With Agatha, the genre influences that inform it have been consistent, and while each episode does a Monster of the Week, or I guess in this case, Trial of the Week, it changes up the vibe. Witchy Desperate Housewives or Big Little Lies, witchy Buffy Satanic Panic. From the trailers, it looks like Wizard of Oz is also on the horizon. This show drops the pastiche, but doesn't drop the genre it's in, as opposed to WandaVision, which did that and became nothing because there wasn't really a narrative outside of the premise. Agatha finds its genre, sticks with it, whereas WandaVision found some nice pastiches but didn't really know what it was as a show and so never found a groove. What is WandaVision and how do you define it as a piece of TV? You can't really, because it's nothing. It has no identity of its own. It's an anthology of interesting individual episodes. Sure, as I mentioned at the top, there are themes at play, Wanda's grief and trauma, but themes and a premise don't make a show satisfying.
It's barely a concept.
That's what Schafer learned from WandaVision and used to make Agatha a compelling spin-off, and what she took with her to improve the mystery aspect of the series as well. While both Agatha and WandaVision have a mystery, the problem is in WandaVision's execution of the mystery box route it takes. The whole point of using the mystery box as a narrative device is that solving the mystery isn't always as important as how the mystery affects the characters. WandaVision lost sight of this and felt the need to over-explain everything, losing mystery and, by extension, the very essence of what the series was to begin with. The mystery box worked in Lost because it was intertwined with emotional stakes. The mysteries weren't just abstract things, weren't just about the island's supernatural elements, they had personal connections to the characters' struggles and histories. Every time the show answered one question, it would dole out 5 more. Even when the mysteries got away from them, they always managed to make the primary focus the characters. Take The Leftovers, Damon Lindelof's follow-up to Lost. He understood that, while effective, the mystery box can't exist for the sole purpose of answer questions, instead shifting focus away from the mystery itself and emphasizing the emotional and psychological impact of the series event on its characters, something he tried to do in the latter seasons of Lost, but was largely rejected by an audience trained to look for clues and solve the mystery. With Agatha, Jack Schafer followed a parallel path to Lindelof in that she understood a mystery was an important tool to hook audiences and develop character, but it can't be the sole thing driving your story. So, instead of taking the mystery box approach, she simply builds a mystery around Agatha and whether or not Teen is her son. While it's highly unlikely he will be, and fans, and myself included, are already speculating and pretty much certain that he's actually Wiccan, Wanda's son, the answer doesn't really matter much because there will still be resonance by the end of the show either way. The point of the teen's identity isn't just a mystery for mystery's sake, it's exploring Agatha's guilt of giving up her child for power as a character, adding suspense for the audience. We're not so much interested in the reveal and more so interested in how that reveal will impact Agatha as a character. If I have one complaint though, it's that the show takes entirely too long to put all these pieces into play. I've already touched on how I think the first episode of Agatha wasn't very good because it fell into the same trap as WandaVision, and while episode 2 gets a bit better, it's still rocky. The problem with the 2-episode premiere is that episode 1 feels superfluous, taking a long time to reach obvious conclusions, and episode 2 treads water to get to the point. They get there in the end, don't worry, teeing up the remainder of the series for success, but this shouldn't be episode 2. It should be the pilot, ditching the content of the first episode but keeping the substance and working it into the premise of episode 2. We already know Wanda is dead following the events of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. It doesn't really matter if you don't either, but realistically, all you have to know is that the spell that was keeping Agatha in a detective show could have died with Wanda. This could have opened the show similarly to Lost, with a disoriented protagonist, Agatha, who, in the case of Agatha All Along, has been living under a spell for the past 3 years, her life, power, and agency taken from her, and now has to reclaim reclaim all of that, has to get back on top. Then you can immediately confront her with some witches she's burnt in the past who've come to settle some beef, but with the help of Teen, discovers that the best way for each of them to get what they want is to travel the witch's road. With the ticking clock of the Salem 7 closing in, the show can dive headfirst into starting the coven, so by episode 2, the quest is in motion, the stakes are in place, we understand why each of the witches needs to travel the road to reclaim a part of themselves that's been taken from them. The show has a clear identity, and it only took one longer pilot, a proper pilot, to arrive us at that point. I mean, even Disney realizes these 2 episodes don't really work on their own. They need to be paired to get to the point, released simultaneously. Which begs the question, why weren't they just one episode? Whatever. I guess the upside is we're criticizing their execution of a TV spin-off. While the first 2 episodes bloat the series a bit, at least we don't have to say, this isn't how TV works. So I guess, Agatha for effort. That was really fucking bad, oh boy. Speaking of Agatha, the show, shockingly, I know, does a really effective job of showing Agatha Harkness as someone who's shamelessly a bad person. Like, the film doesn't even try to say that she's a misunderstood person. Like, it's just straight up is like, nah, she's a con artist, liar, a manipulator. You can't trust her. She's not this villain hellbent on world domination or control, but she's someone who's drawn to power and those who have it as a means to attain it herself, mainly through witchcraft. And that's really cool to see. You just have a bitch of a character who's doing bad shit, but isn't just this two-dimensional mustache-twirling character either. We saw towards the end of WandaVision that Agatha was someone who was told she was evil from a young age by her mother, simply by seeking something that she wasn't allowed to have, knowledge. Because she's been fed this idea her whole life that she is bad, at some point you have to imagine she buys into it and believes it herself. Whether or not that's true, I'm sure will be the emotional climax of the series, but there's no denying she's willing to do unspeakable things, get her hands dirty in order to have a taste of the forbidden fruit she was denied at a young age. She's lying, perhaps even to herself, and putting on a performance, and it's an act that has multiple layers to it because of the years she spent being this witchy stereotype. As Patti LuPone's Lilia puts it,
witches like you are the reason people think we poison apples and steal children and eat babies.
Babies are delicious.
Oh!
and this adherence to being the stereotype of a witch is directly linked to Agatha's selfishness. Because she was betrayed by her coven, her mother, centuries ago, she likely came to the realization that the only person deserving of power, the only person she could look out for and trust, is herself. She'll be a girl's girl, cozy up to powerful witches, pretend to be their friend, a neighbor, but her motives are purely self-serving. She wants what she can't have, whatever the cost. It's why she played mind games with Wanda in WandaVision and is so willing to double-cross her coven or leave them for dead as they journey down the witch's road. She's a bit of a succubus because her power is attained by consuming that of another. She gets her power from others. This fuels her complex. Agatha herself is a rather powerless woman who is denied power and shamed for coveting it, so it's therefore fitting that her mission and power set as a witch becomes one of stepping on other witches to reclaim what she never had, but not for the benefit of other outcasts like her. In fact, she walks over those she views as inferior, hiding behind their bodies so as to not risk her own life. That's why it's sweet poetry that she should get a taste of her own medicine via Wanda, a witch who took her power and left her magicless and alone. Agatha's conviction is tested, and she passes as it's revealed Agatha gave up her child, her son, in order to obtain the power of the Darkhold, a nice contrast to Wanda, who traded in her life for that of her children's happiness. The callousness of this decision is one that haunts her. She hates feeling powerless, but with the arrival of Teen and the possibility of him being her son, I mean, again, he's likely not, she begins to question her very nature as a witch. This is only further compounded when an old flame, Rio, played by Aubrey Plaza, resurfaces. Rio taunts Agatha as she tries to corner her. Agatha has run from her for too long, and yet the two have a fiery passion for one another.
You don't have a heart.
Yes, I do. It's black. And it beats for you.
It's made clear from the beginning that Agatha is one of the only witches who's walked the road and made it out on the other side to be granted whatever it is they want. I guess in her case it was power. Whether or not you believe that to be true, given how Agatha is just a constant liar and can't be trusted, it doesn't really matter at this point. One of the questions at the center of the series, regardless, is how did she do it? If she in fact did do it. It's what all the other witches in her coven want to know, and what she herself is, ironically, withholding from them. As one of the series' mysteries, this is incredibly compelling because, again, it's not just a mystery for mystery's sake like in WandaVision, it's a mystery directly tied to the series' protagonist. While these answers have yet to reveal themselves, it's clear based on Agatha's self-preservation and backstabbing tendencies seen across episodes 3 and 4 on the road thus far, that she used her coven as a shield to advance through the trials and made it out on the other side by simply outliving the rest of them. It looks as though she'll be attempting to do the same this go-round, already moving past the death of Mrs. Hart without a care for what happened to her. Unfortunately for Agatha, her death came before her trial, and thus a new witch is needed to fill the role of the Green Witch. And who better and more fitting to challenge Agatha in this role than Rio, the very person Agatha has been running away from, but deep down knows is best suited for the role. And so this old flame is reignited, and it's rather telling that the death of Mrs. Hart triggered the arrival of Rio, there to collect another soul. Given the way Rio comes to the coven on the road, and that Agatha reminded her why she couldn't kill her in episode 1, it's looking like Rio is actually Lady Death. As episode 4 explicitly states, Agatha is Rio's scar. A one-sided relationship Agatha has avoided for centuries by stealing the power, potentially life force, of other witches. A flirtation with death, but never a full-time commitment. A mission for Rio to claim the one that got away. Agatha, who's hid behind dark magic for so long and is now vulnerable enough for death to knock at her door. Think Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. I mean, who's to say? This is just pure speculation. I don't actually know if this is the case, but given the nature of the show, it would make a lot of sense. Plus, it's a witchy enough spin on the characters and a clever adaptation of the lore from the 2015 Scarlet Witch comic. Where WandaVision was merely interested in adapting the aesthetic trappings and broad strokes of Tom King's iconic The Visions, what if Vision hung up the cape and settled down and had a family in an American Beauty-esque suburban thriller, without really getting to the heart of why that comic was so impactful, Agatha All Along course corrects, taking the core idea present in James Robinson's Scarlet Witch run, The Witch's Road, and using it as the foundation to craft a new story centered around Agatha's traumatic past and all of the pain and suffering she brought unto others, as well as the baggage she's carried with her since the 1600s she's yet to come to terms with. And it's not just Agatha the trial's test. The rest of the coven are confronted with their own past as a way to reclaim what they lost and what the world took from them and painted them as. Across episodes 3 and 4, the show really finds its groove following a more episodic format, a Monster of the Week format. Serialized, but each episode is self-contained. As Agatha and her coven walk the Witch's Road, they are confronted with trials that not only peel back the layers of Agatha, but the witch the trial centers around. Think of them as the inverse Salem witch trials, a reclamation of the very idea where, instead of being tried, burned, drowned, hung, they take the act, the iconography, and turn it into something meaningful and helpful for them that gets them out of the trial, that releases them from the spell they're under. Each of the trials so far has dealt with this idea of reclamation, of confronting the characters with the ghosts of their past in order to take control of their lives. Through these episodic trials, Agatha All Along is allowed to feel like TV. This is then aided by an ensemble cast that isn't stacked with A-list movie stars that distract from what's important. While Agatha is the main character, the show is more or less about the ensemble. Each character gets an episode that forces them to face their fears and unpack their emotions. Each stop tests a different kind of magic, which is why you bring an expert along to orient the episode around. Each episode, we learn more about Agatha, adding to the overarching narrative while getting stuff from the rest of the crew. It's just good, well-structured, and well-written television. Look, we know how these Disney Plus shows can go, and Lord knows I've fallen for it before. I can't say for certain that Agatha All Along will stick the landing, but I can't deny that after 4 episodes and moving past a rough start, we're not going to overlook that, but moving past it, the show is really starting to win me over. If we compare it to where its predecessor, WandaVision, was after 4 episodes, I think it's safe to say that the show is not only getting better, more interesting, more exciting with each episode, but it's genuinely functioning like a proper television show, with actors who feel geared for television. No movie stars, but like genuinely great actors, and fuck man, you got Patti LuPone in there, like hell yeah. And it's about a C-list character where there are no expectations, so you're able to really focus on telling a compelling story with intimacy and aesthetics and an embracing of the genre head on. Because it's part of Marvel's little horror pocket for their universe, a nice niche they've kind of carved out for themselves that they really should be taking advantage of more and more, it can do its own thing, focus on the characters without directly invoking the larger universe while taking that history they need surrounding Wanda and incorporating it into the series in an easily accessible way. Every episode feels complete while still offering a little hook to keep you enticed. And even when it fails, like Agatha largely does in the first 2 episodes, it's failing as an episode of television and not failing because it's punching above its weight class. Whereas with WandaVision, I mean, it almost lost sight of the fact that it was a TV show, and that was its undoing. Agatha is able to take the intimacy and character-centric moments that made us love WandaVision and make that the focus of the journey down the witch's road, using the format of television to tell the story as opposed to feeling like this is a story that could have been a film. You know what? Who would have thought that the key to successful live-action Marvel television could be found in Agatha All Along?